Hi, Scott Dreyer here with DreyerCoaching.com, part 6 of our book study of a remarkable book called Checkmate in Berlin, Checkmate in Berlin. And this little section will look at the role of culture. We often think about struggle or politics in terms of, politicians and economy and bombs and missiles and armies. But there's a little snippet about culture and its role in freedom or dictatorship or identity. I think you find this interesting. So the book is called Checkmate in Berlin, and we're looking at this time in history, 1945, 1949, after World War II, when Germany was divided into 4 pieces, and likewise Berlin into 4 pieces. And so as the Allies came into Germany after World War II, one of the first goals was called denazification. The idea was, we're not going to put all the Germans in jail or kill everybody. Of course not. Identify the leaders, the most heinous leaders who had done the most evil deeds, and bring those people to justice. At the very least, get them out of their positions of power and find non-Nazis who are not so tainted by Nazism to lead the new country. That was the goal of denazification. So this is page 176 in Checkmate in Berlin. The 4 powers forged a consensus of sorts in the early days of denazification, but this was abruptly shredded by the arrival from Moscow of a Soviet colonel named Sergey Tulpanov. Ruthless and intellectually brilliant, Colonel Tulpanov quickly realized there was political capital to be made out of denazification. With a single-mindedness that stunned all who witnessed it, he set out to exploit this capital. Tulpanov was the incoming head of the Soviet Information Bureau, working closely with General Kotakov. General Kotakov was overseeing Berlin, the Russian part of Berlin. It was a uniquely powerful post, for Tulpanov was in charge of every aspect of culture, including theater, cinema, journalism, and propaganda. So notice journalism is a part of culture. His fiefdom included the whole of Soviet-occupied Germany, but it was in Berlin that he was to fight his sharpest battles. He cut an unmistakable figure in the streets of the capital on account of his punchbag physiognomy. His face, his manner, his whole appearance immediately arrested my attention, wrote American information officer Nicholas Nabokov. His head was clean-shaven and he had large protruding ears. It was totally necklace, like an oversized billiard ball on a short, well-built body. Charming but choleric, Tulpanov did not suffer fools gladly. He lambasted a sycophantic Berlin theater manager, so he was very harsh, very, very brusque, but he was a genius. Tulpanov's encyclopedic knowledge of German culture made him a formidable enemy to the Western Allies. He had studied at the University of Heidelberg and could discuss Goethe's writings with the insight of an academic. Heidelberg is in southern Germany. Goethe was a famous, kind of like the German Shakespeare, you could say. He even kept a statue of Goethe, the writer, on his desk. By the summer of 1946, Tulpanov was influencing public opinion in every sphere of culture. His principal mission was to win the hearts and minds of Berliners. Not an easy task, given the raping and looting that had taken place in the recent past. There was an urgent need, said one, to prove that the country of Pushkin, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Chekhov, and Gorky was cultured and civilized. Tulpanov aimed to demonstrate that Russians and Germans shared a love of high culture, unlike the uncouth, gum-chewing Americans or the middle-brow British with their preposterous Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. So this guy's a great writer. And he's saying, what this Tulpanov guy did was to look back, said Russia's created these great writers, Dostoevsky, Pushkin, and others. Germany has great writers. So in fact, Russians and Germans have a lot in common. Great, rich cultural heritage, unlike these kind of trashy Americans and Brits, basically what he was saying. So interesting, the role of culture. In America today, many people are asking, what is our role of culture today? Journalism, obviously, news media, Hollywood, academia, colleges. There seems to be kind of a steady drumbeat for a lot of stuff there. And culture, interesting. Let's keep going. This is page 177. To assist him in his task, he had picked a team of intellectuals who understood that culture was the perfect vehicle for propaganda. I read somewhere Stalin had said, if I could control Hollywood, I would control the world, because he knew the power of movies to shape people's minds, basically brainwashing. Stalin said that in the 30s or 40s. Tulpanov's deputy, Alexander Dimshitz, was a former professor at Leningrad University with a deep knowledge of German history. Other recruits brought specific skills that would help them in the task ahead. Virtually all Russian culture officers were carefully selected specialists, said the British officer George Clare. They had a lot going for them. They are bright, and they knew what they were doing. They rapidly restored the city's principal concert halls and encouraged Berlin's finest performers to return to work, even if they had been enthusiastic Nazis. One of the first concerts they performed was Beethoven's Fidelio at the State Opera. It was a profoundly moving experience for the Berlin audience, for whom a night at the opera seemed to belong to the distant past. Kurt Reese was an American journalist based in Berlin. He studied Tulpanov's maneuvering with appalled fascination. The Soviet was a formidable enemy with an ambitious goal. He wanted to bring all of Berlin under Russian control, said Reese. It was going to be a fast surprise assault, which would not give the Western powers a chance to recover their balance. One of Sergey Tulpanov's most powerful propaganda tools was Radio Berlin, whose studios had been captured intact in May 1945. Keep in mind, in 1946, TV had not been invented yet. Movies were mainstream, but radio was a main way to get information to people, radio. None of the broadcasters were subjected to denazification. According to one American intelligence agency agent, the station continued, quote, with the same personnel that had been there under the Nazis. They just changed the colors of their shirts. So the Nazi staff who'd run Radio Berlin, obviously pumping Nazi propaganda, all of a sudden realized, hey, we have new bosses. Let's change our shirt color. And now we'll just pump out the Russian propaganda, do as we're told. The Soviet colonel encouraged these broadcasters to sharpen their attacks on Frank Cowley. He was the American commander in Berlin, West Berlin, by now the #1 enemy in Berlin to the Russians. Cowley himself was quick to notice the change in tone. Quote, anytime that Soviet Radio Berlin could think out something defamatory or insulting about me, he wrote, the air was full of my misdeeds. Tulpanov was also the Svengali figure. That's like a person who is behind the scenes. He was the Svengali figure who pulled the strings on the Soviet-backed newspapers. He told editors that the Americans and British were no longer to be called allies. Instead, they would be described as imperialists or aggressors. Look at the power of word choice, okay? Colonel Cowley was once again Tulpanov's prime target. Newspapers began to refer to him as the brute colonel, dictator, or terrorist, monikers that brought Cowley considerable pride. After being an enemy of democracy, he wrote, I believed I achieved the ultimate in perverse recognition when I was dubbed the Beast of Berlin. One observer compared Tulpanov's propaganda skills to those of Joseph Goebbels. Like Goebbels, he had almost unlimited power. Like Hitler's propaganda minister, he could not bear being contradicted. Frank Cowley was not alone in being taken back by the ferocity of Tulpanov's propaganda. Lucius Clay was the general who was actually Cowley's boss, American general. Lucius Clay also expressed concern at the constant, unremitting daily attacks on everything American, our system of government, our president, the American military. He felt the Americans were being completely outflanked and needed to launch an immediate and sustained counterattack. They did this by overhauling the existing American radio station, RIAS, it's called Radio in American Sector, and using it to counter Tulpanov's smears. So basically fight fire with fire. The ensuing war of the aerial waves was to prove every bit as dangerous as a military ground offensive. A sign of how seriously the Americans took this battle came when they appointed their British intelligence chief, William Heimlich, to lead it. Not only was he an expert in intelligence, he was also experienced in broadcasting and marketing. He immediately launched Operation Backtalk. I love that name, Operation Backtalk, an aggressive pushback against Soviet propaganda. Heimlich's first task was to transform RIAS, Radio in American Sector, into a round-the-clock operation. When fully powered, this self-styled, quote, free voice of the free world could reach as far as Poland and Czechoslovakia. When its signal was jammed by the Soviets, Heimlich sent RIAS loudspeaker vans into the streets to broadcast directly to Berliners. Heimlich never broadcast straight propaganda. Rather, he offered Berliners something more seductive: news, special programs for women, serials for children, and witty cabaret shows of the sort that had never been heard on German radio before. Above all, he offered humor, aware that this was his greatest weapon in the fight against Tulpanov. I believe it was Mark Twain humorist, who said, nothing can stand against ridicule. Nothing can stand against ridicule. So the Americans, we used humor as a counterattack. When we were attacked, we never came back with vituperation. We came back with laughter. We made a joke of the attacks upon us. It was a recipe that worked. Within a few months, 8 out of every 10 Berliners was tuning into RIAS each day, a far greater number than those who listened to Tulpanov's Radio Berlin. So there you go. The role of culture in brainwashing of people and changing mindset, the role of culture. Okay, so more to come. Thanks for watching. More to come. Next, Berlin Airlift.